My son thinks the shove that cracked two of my ribs was just a domestic accident. He is standing in the hallway right now, arguing with a nurse, confident the law will protect him. He does not realize that 10 minutes ago, while the doctor checked my vitals, I called my lawyer to change my will. By the time he understands what I have done, the inheritance he has been waiting for will be gone forever. My name is Lorraine Whitaker. I am 63 years old, a widow, and until tonight, I thought I was a successful woman. I built Silver Trail Supply from a single dusty shed into the largest chain of construction materials in North Texas. I know how to negotiate with steel suppliers, how to fire a dishonest foreman, and how to spot a crack in a foundation before the house collapses. But lying here in this hospital bed, with a compression bandage wrapped so tight around my chest that every breath feels like a punishment, I realize I missed the rot in my own foundation until the roof came crashing down on my head. Through the thin wood of the hospital door, I can hear my son, Mason. He is arguing with the head nurse, his voice pitched in that specific tone of aggrieved entitlement I used to think was just confidence. She is confused. Okay, Mason is saying, probably running his hand through his hair the way he does when he is lying. It was a domestic accident. She tripped. I was just trying to catch her. And, look, my mother is old. She gets confused about what happened. I stare at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling. I am not confused. I know exactly how I got here. It is a long way from the trailer park in West Texas where I started. My father was an oil driller who drank away his wages, and my mother cleaned motel rooms until her back gave out. I learned early that poverty has a smell. It smells like old grease and despair. When I left for Dallas at 19, I had $37 tucked into my bra and a burning rage in my belly to never smell that smell again. I got a job at a lumber yard, working the inventory shift at night and the sales counter in the morning. I learned the difference between pine and oak, between a debit and a credit. And I saved every dime until I had enough to buy into a partnership. That was where I met Jack Whitaker. He was a carpenter with calloused hands and eyes the color of worn denim. Jack hated debt more than he hated sin. He used to tell me, Lorraine, honey, money made with clean hands and a clear head spends the best. The rest is just noise. We built the business together, starting out of a garage that froze in the winter and baked in the summer. We were partners in every sense of the word. Then came Mason. I remember the night he was born. The doctors put him in my arms, red-faced and squalling, and I felt a love so fierce it terrified me. I looked at his tiny, perfect feet, and I made a promise that would seal my fate. I whispered, "You will never have to walk to school in shoes held together by duct tape like I did. You will never know what it means to be hungry or cold. I promise you that." I kept that promise. I paved his road with gold, and I never saw that I was making it too slippery for him to stand on his own 2 feet. I take a shallow breath, and the pain flares up in my side, sharp and hot. It reminds me of the kitchen counter. It reminds me of the cold granite edge catching my ribs as I fell. It reminds me of Mason's face, not filled with horror, but with a twisted self-righteousness. He had stood over me while I gasped for air, his hands balled into fists, and he had said, I was just defending my wife. Mum, you were getting in her face. You did this to yourself. He truly believes that. He believes that shoving his 63-year-old mother into a stone counter because she refused to sign a check is an act of chivalry. The fluorescent lights overhead hum with a low, irritating buzz. I close my eyes. I am not here because of a stumble. I am not here because of bad luck. I am here because of a lifetime of mistakes with a child I thought I was loving the right way. I gave him everything I never had. And in doing so, I took away the one thing he needed, the ability to hear the word no. My left hand is resting under the thin hospital sheet. My fingers are stiff, and there is a smudge of dried blood on my thumb that the nurses missed when they cleaned me up. I am still clutching my phone. It feels heavy, like a weapon. 10 minutes ago, right after they gave me the pain medication, but before the fog rolled in, I made exactly one phone call. It was not to a friend. It was not to a priest. I called Teresa, my lawyer. And as I listened to Mason outside, spinning his web of lies to the nurse, trying to protect his reputation and his inheritance, he has no idea that the ink is already drying on the documents that will cut him loose. He thinks he broke my ribs. He does not know that tonight. I broke his future. Looking back now, the cracks in the foundation did not start with the shove in the kitchen. They started years ago. Hairline fractures I chose to paint over with money and affection. Mason was a bright boy in his teenage years. He had a jump shot on the basketball court that could clear the net without touching the rim, and a smile that could charm a snake. But Jack and I never let him feel the ground beneath his feet. If his grades slipped, I hired the best tutors in Dallas. If he sat on the bench during a game, I was the mother making a donation to the booster club, or having a quiet, firm word with the coach about maximizing potential. We smoothed every bump in his road until the road was so polished he could not get any traction. Jack tried to warn me. I remember him standing in our driveway one evening, watching Mason throw a tantrum because we had bought him the wrong color sneakers. "Lorraine," Jack had said, his voice heavy with a fatigue that had nothing to do with work. "You are turning him into a man who thinks that if he scowls hard enough, the world will change its rotation for him. He is our only one." "Jack," I had replied, defensive and blind. "We have the means now. Why should he struggle like we did? What is the point of all this work if we cannot give him the best?" So Mason went to a private university in Austin to study finance, while other students waited tables or worked in the library to buy beer money. Mason had a monthly allowance that rivaled a teacher's salary. His first car was a brand new lifted pickup truck with leather seats and a premium sound system. Meanwhile, Jack was still driving his 12-year-old work van with the rusted fender because he refused to replace a vehicle that still ran perfectly fine. Then came Nora. She entered our lives like a cold front, sudden and sharp. She was beautiful, certainly, with dark hair that never seemed to move and ambition that radiated off her like heat. She worked at a real estate firm called Brightfield Estates, the same company where Mason had done a 2-month internship before quitting because the manager was too demanding of his time. I felt a prick of unease the first night Mason brought her home for dinner. It was not anything she said. It was her eyes. As she walked through our living room, her gaze did not linger on the warmth of the fireplace or the family photos on the mantel. Her eyes darted around, assessing the square footage, the quality of the crown moulding, the value of the imported rugs. When we gave them a tour, she stopped in front of the small steel safe Jack kept in the corner of his home office. She stared at it for a beat too long, her calculation almost audible. Later that night, as we were loading the dishwasher, Jack leaned in close to me. "That girl," he whispered, scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary. She was not admiring our home. Lorraine. She was pricing it. "Oh, you are just being a grumpy old man," I scolded him, though a small knot formed in my stomach. She is just observant. And she called me Mom all night. She seems very caring. We gave them a wedding that could have been featured in a magazine. It was held at a historic hotel in San Antonio, with a 10-piece jazz band and crystal centerpieces. I paid for 80% of it. During the reception, Mason stood up to give a toast, his face flushed with expensive champagne. "To the best mother in the world," he declared into the microphone, looking right at me. "No one loves me like you do. Mum, no one believes in me like you. I would be nothing without you." I teared up, letting his words wash away my doubts. I felt essential. I did not realize that to him. Being loved and being funded were the exact same thing. After the wedding, the dynamic shifted with dizzying speed. Nora quit her job at the real estate firm within weeks, announcing that she wanted to focus on building the family foundation. Mason, meanwhile, began his carousel of employment. He would land a job, keep it for 3 months, and then quit, claiming his bosses were incompetent or that they did not understand his potential. That was when the financial requests began. They were never desperate. They were always framed as opportunities. Nora was a master at this. "Mom," she would say, sitting at my kitchen counter, touching my arm lightly. "You built an empire from nothing. You are the most inspiring woman I know. I found this small investment opportunity, a fixer-upper in a transitioning neighborhood. With your capital and Mason's vision, we could flip it. Consider it a loan, just for 6 months." She made me feel like a mentor. She made me feel like I was helping the next generation rise. I wrote the check for $20,000, then another for $15,000. I told myself I was investing in their future. I did not know I was simply paying for the shovel they would eventually use to bury me. The silence in my life began the afternoon Jack died. He collapsed in the back of the lumber yard, sawdust still clinging to his boots. It was a massive heart attack. He was gone before his knees hit the concrete floor. But 2 weeks before that Tuesday afternoon, as if he had heard a whisper from God, Jack had sat me down at our kitchen table. He had looked serious, his face lined with years of hard work. "Lorraine," he had said, gripping my hand tight. "If anything happens to me, promise me you will keep a tight grip on the controlling shares of Betrayal Supply. Do not let Mason take the wheel until he knows how to drive. He is not ready for the weight of it." I held on to those words during the funeral. Mason wept loudly in the front pew, his shoulders shaking, looking like a broken child. Nora, however, was dry-eyed and efficient. She moved through the wake like a general, organizing the catering and managing the guests. But even then, standing by the grave, she leaned in close to me. "Mom," she whispered, her voice low. "Mason and I were thinking, maybe it is time you sell a portion of your shares, just to lighten the load. You do not need that stress anymore." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. After a few months of living alone in our empty house, the silence became deafening. Mason and Nora started coming over every other day, bringing brochures for their new home in a gated community outside Fort Worth. It was a sprawling property, and I knew exactly how much it cost because I had provided the $70,000 for the down payment. "Move in with us," Mason urged, looking at me with those puppy dog eyes. "We have a guest suite on the first floor. It opens right out to the garden. We want you close." "Mum?" I agreed. I sold the house Jack and I had built and moved into the guest suite. At first, it was lovely. My room had French doors that opened to a view of a man-made lake. "Consider this your home, Mom," Nora said, hugging me. "We are so happy you are here." But the warmth cooled so slowly, I almost did not notice the temperature dropping. It started with small rules. A week in, I was reading in the living room at 8:30 in the evening. Nora walked in, wearing a silk robe, and sighed loud enough to be heard across the room. "Mom," she said, offering a tight smile. "Mason and we really need the common areas to ourselves after 8 o'clock. It is just for our marriage. You know, we need our privacy." I retreated to my room. Then came the kitchen restrictions. I loved to cook. It was how I showed love. But when I tried to make a pot of chili one afternoon, Nora came home and looked at the stove with horror. "Oh, Mom." "No," she said, turning off the burner. "This range is Italian. The finish is very delicate, and the smell of chili, it gets into the curtains. If you want something specific, just tell the housekeeper. Please do not cook in here." I stopped cooking. I stopped sitting in the living room. I became a guest in the house I helped pay for. Mason, meanwhile, became a ghost. He avoided every conversation about the business. Every time I suggested he come to the office and learn the inventory system or try managing a small branch, Nora would intervene before he could answer. Mason is not made for manual labor or counting stock. "Mom," she would say, her voice dripping with condescension. "He has a strategic mind. He is born to do big things, not stand behind a counter selling screws." Then the paperwork started appearing. Nora would slide a stack of documents across the dinner table between the salad and the main course. "Just some little things for tax simplification," she would say breezily. "It helps us pool the family assets for better rates. Just sign here, and here." Jack's warning would ring in my ears. "I will need to run this by my accountant first," I would say, pushing the papers back. Nora's smile would falter, just for a second, revealing a flash of irritation. "You are being paranoid. Mum, we are just trying to help you." The hardest part was the children. Ellie and Jonah, my grandchildren, used to run to me the moment I walked in the room. But slowly, Nora began to build a wall. If I tried to read them a story, she would appear. "Come on, kids. Grandma is tired," she would say, pulling them away. Or, "No, Mom, do not give them juice. You spoil them too much. It is bad for their discipline." I felt like I was being erased, bit by bit. The breaking point of our civility happened at a Sunday dinner. The air was already thick with tension. I was trying to make conversation and innocently brought up a memory. "Mason," I said, chuckling softly. "Do you remember that job at the logistics company? The one where the manager let you go because you were 40 minutes late 3 days in a row? You were so mad at him. But it taught you a good lesson about time." The clatter of silverware stopped. Mason turned bright red. Nora dropped her fork. She turned to me, her eyes cold and hard as flint. "Mom," she said, her voice slicing through the air. "In this house, we do not talk about things that humiliate my husband, especially not in front of the children. Do not ever do that again." I looked at Mason, waiting for him to defend me, to laugh it off. He just looked down at his plate. That was the moment I realized I was no longer the matriarch of this family. I was an inconvenience they were tolerating while they waited for me to die. It was a Tuesday evening when Nora finally played her hand. The house was quiet. The children were asleep upstairs, and Mason was pouring himself a second glass of scotch. Nora walked into the kitchen and placed a thick leather binder on the island counter in front of me. She did not smile this time. "We need to settle this." "Mom," Nora said, her voice tight and businesslike. "Mason and I have had our lawyers draw up a financial unity proposal. It is for the future stability of the family." I opened the binder. The legal jargon was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. It was a transfer of deed, granting Mason immediate 50% ownership of Silver Trail Supply, along with a full, durable power of attorney over my personal bank accounts. I closed the binder and pushed it back across the cold granite. "No," I said calmly. Mason spun around, the ice clinking in his glass. "What do you mean?" "No, I mean, I am not signing this," I told him, keeping my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "Mason, you have never spent a single day sweating in the lumber yard. You do not know our suppliers. You do not know the margins. If you want to run the company, you show up at 6 in the morning on Monday. You put on a work vest. You start loading trucks like everyone else. Then we can talk about ownership." Mason's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "You always do this? You always hold the money over my head like a weapon. You think the business matters more than your own son. You are obsessed with control. It is not about control." "Mason, it is about respect," I replied. "It is jealousy," Nora cut in, her voice rising. She stepped closer, her perfume overpowering the room. "You cannot stand that he listens to me now. You want him to be a little boy forever, so you can feel powerful. You are suffocating us." I looked at Nora, really looked at her, and decided I was done pretending. I am not the one suffocating him. "Nora," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And do not talk to me about trust. I saw the emails on the iPad you left in the den. I saw the messages to the broker about mortgaging my house to fund that non-existent consulting firm of yours." The air in the kitchen vanished. Nora's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. You invaded my privacy," Nora stammered, reaching out to snatch the binder back, presumably to hide whatever other schemes were tucked inside. "That is my property," I snapped, reaching out to grab the binder before she could take it. My fingers brushed against the leather. Suddenly, a blur of motion came from the side. "Do not touch my wife," Mason roared. He did not just step between us. He shoved me. It was a hard, two-handed push against my shoulders, fueled by years of resentment and alcohol. I flew backward. My feet slipped on the polished tile. I did not even have time to scream before my side collided with the sharp, unforgiving edge of the granite island. Crack. The sound was dry and sickening, like a tree branch snapping in a winter storm. I crumbled to the floor. The air left my lungs in a rush, replaced by a white-hot agony that exploded in my chest. I tried to inhale, but my body refused. I lay there, gasping like a dying fish, clutching my side. "Oh my God." Nora shrieked. She looked at the window, then at the door. "Mason. The neighbors, keep your voice down." She did not rush to me. She rushed to close the blinds. Mason stood over me, his chest heaving, his hands still raised. He looked at me. His mother, curled on the floor, unable to breathe, and I saw the panic in his eyes curdle into something darker, self-preservation. You should not have grabbed her like that," Mason stammered, his voice shaking but defiant. I was just defending my wife." "Mom, you were attacking her." I tried to speak. to tell him he had broken me, but all that came out was a wet wheeze. The pain was blinding, radiating from my ribs down to my hip. "Call 911. Mason told Nora, but he did not move to help me up. Nora pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. She looked down at me, her eyes devoid of warmth. "Hello, 911? Nora said into the phone, her voice shifting instantly into a frantic, tearful performance. "Please hurry. It is my mother-in-law. She slipped on the kitchen tile. She fell and hit the counter. Yes, it was an accident. A terrible accident." She stared right at me as she said it, her gaze heavy with a silent threat. Dare to say otherwise. I closed my eyes against the pain, tears leaking out, not because of the broken bones, but because the son I had worshipped had just watched me fall and decided to save himself instead. The ambulance ride was a blur of rattling metal and the smell of antiseptic. But what I remember most vividly was Mason's hand on mine. He was not holding it for comfort. He was holding it the way a handler holds a leash. Every time the paramedic asked me a question, Mason would squeeze my fingers, a sharp, rhythmic pressure that shot pain up my arm to join the agony in my chest. "She is just confused," Mason told the paramedic, his voice thick with fake concern. "She has been unsteady on her feet lately. I tried to catch her, but it happened so fast." He looked at me, his eyes pleading but his grip punishing. "Right, Mum. It was just a slip." I could not breathe deep enough to argue. I just closed my eyes and let the darkness hover at the edges of my vision, realizing that the umbilical cord that had connected us for 35 years had finally been severed. In the emergency room, the diagnosis was clinical and cold. 2 ribs broken on the left side, a hairline fracture on a third. The doctor, a weary man with kind eyes, ordered the nurses to clear the room for a moment. But Nora refused to leave. She stood right at the head of the bed, her hand resting on my shoulder, her fingers digging into my gown. "Mrs. Whitaker?" the doctor asked, looking over his glasses at me. "Your injuries are consistent with a high-impact fall against a hard object. I need to ask you, do you feel safe in your home?" I looked up. I saw Nora's face. She was smiling, a tight, porcelain smile that did not reach her eyes. She leaned down, her breath smelling of mints and deceit. "Tell him, Mom," she said sweetly. "Tell him how you tripped over the rug." I thought of the police. I thought of the truth. But then I thought of Ellie and Jonah. I thought of my wheelchair in the corner, of my bank accounts that Nora had already started to tangle with hers. I was a hostage in a hospital gown. I stumbled. I whispered, hating the tremor in my voice. I hit the island. I am just so clumsy lately. The doctor looked at me for a long beat, knowing I was lying, but bound by my words. He nodded slowly and left. A few minutes later, Nora stepped out to take a call, probably to spin the story to their friends. Mason sat in the chair she vacated. He did not ask if I was in pain. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Listen to me," he said. "If you blow this out of proportion, if you bring the police into this, you will never see the kids again. Ellie and Jonah do not need that kind of drama. Do you understand? You are their grandmother, but I am their father. I decide who they see." I looked at him, and the last shred of maternal softness in me calcified. He was not looking at his mother. He was looking at a liability. I was a risk assessment on a spreadsheet, a variable that needed to be managed to protect his lifestyle. I understand, I said, and I did. I understood everything. Eventually. They left to go home and rest, complaining about how exhausting the night had been for them. I was left alone with the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. The room was dark, save for the glow of the machines. An older nurse came in to check my IV. She had grey hair pinned back tight and eyes that had seen every kind of cruelty humans inflict on each other. She adjusted my blanket, and as she smoothed the sheet over my hand, she slipped a small, stiff card into my palm. "You have a choice, honey," she whispered, so low the monitors almost drowned her out. "Do not ever let them make you think you don't." She left before I could answer. I looked at the card. It was a hotline for elder abuse. I tucked it under my pillow. In the silence of that room, with the pain throbbing in time with my heartbeat, my mind drifted back to Jack. I remembered a conversation we had 5 years before he died. We were in his office, and he was showing me a small floor safe hidden under a loose floorboard in the supply closet of our oldest branch, the one nobody visited anymore. Lorraine, he had told me, handing me a key. Life is long and people change. Always keep a road out that only you know about. We had put $50,000 in cash and a separate deed in that safe. I had forgotten about it in my grief, and later in my comfort. But now, the memory was a lifeline. For the first time in years, I did not blame myself for spoiling Mason. I did not feel the crushing weight of guilt. That weight was replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. If Mason saw me as a risk, as a fragile old woman to be managed, he had made a fatal miscalculation. I reached for my phone with my left hand, ignoring the pain. I was done being the victim. If he wanted to treat me like a business problem, I would become the kind of hostile takeover he never saw coming. I would become the storm. The morphine was starting to hum in my veins, a low, dull thrum that threatened to pull me under. But I fought it. I needed to be awake. I needed to be sharp. I pressed the call button, and when the night nurse appeared, a young woman with tired eyes, I asked for my phone. My hands were shaking, not just from the pain radiating through my chest, but from a cold, hard rage that had finally replaced my shock. I dialed Teresa Klein. It was 2 a.m, but I knew she would answer. Teresa has been my lawyer for 20 years. A woman in her 50s with hair the colour of steel and a backbone to match. She had drafted every major contract for Silver Trail Supply, and she knew where every skeleton in my business was buried. She picked up on the second ring. Lorraine. Her voice was thick with sleep, but it sharpened instantly. "It is 2 a.m. What is wrong, Teresa?" I said, forcing my voice to be steady, despite the jagged shards of glass I felt in my ribs every time I inhaled. "I am in the hospital. Mason shoved me. I have broken ribs. But listen to me carefully. We need to change the will. Tonight. Right now. Before this pain medication turns my brain into mush and makes me incompetent on paper." There was a pause on the other end, heavy and pregnant. Then, the rustle of sheets and the click of a lamp. "I am sending my mobile notary," Teresa said, her voice now crisp and professional. "He is 20 minutes away. I will draft the addendums and email them to him to print on arrival. You just focus on breathing. Lorraine, you keep yourself alive and leave the rest to me." 30 minutes later, a man named Mr. Henderson arrived with a portable printer and a briefcase. He was quiet, efficient, and smelled faintly of coffee. He set up a small camera to record the session, a necessary step to prove I was of sound mind and not under duress. He asked me the date, the president's name, and why I was there. I answered every question with a clarity that surprised even me. Then, we began the surgery, not of my body, but on my legacy. I signed the new last will and testament, in bold, black ink. I stripped Mason of his status as my primary beneficiary. It was done. The empire I had built with Jack, the millions of dollars in assets, the real estate, none of it would go directly to him. Instead, my controlling shares in Silver Trail Supply were transferred into a blind trust, overseen by a board of 3 independent directors. The clause is specific. Mr. Henderson read aloud, his voice low in the quiet room. Mason Whitaker shall receive a monthly stipend equivalent to the entry-level salary of a warehouse employee, adjusted for inflation, provided he maintains full-time employment. He has no voting rights. He has no access to the principal. Good, I said. Next, we set up a separate educational trust for Ellie and Jonah. They could access the funds only when they turned 25, and only if they had completed a 4-year degree or a certified trade program and had no criminal record. I would not let Mason and Nora turn my grandchildren into the same kind of entitled monsters they had become. Then came the immediate measures. I signed a document revoking the durable power of attorney I had foolishly granted Mason 3 years ago to help Mom manage the accounts. I want all accounts frozen. I told Teresa, who was on speakerphone. Anything above $500 gets flagged. If they try to buy a stick of gum with my money tomorrow, I want the card to decline. I am already on it. Teresa replied. And Lorraine? I am going to recommend we run a full forensic audit on the last 2 years. If they were desperate enough to get violent over a signature, I suspect they have already been dipping into the pot. Do it, I said. Turn over every rock. If they stole a dime, I want to know. The scratching of the pen on paper was the only sound in the room. It was a violent sound, aggressive and final. When the last document was signed and notarized, Mr. Henderson packed up his equipment. He paused at the door, looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Mrs. Whitaker, he asked softly. For the records, if the court asks, do you want to include a specific reason for this sudden change in your estate? I looked at the bandage on my arm and the bruising already blooming on my wrist. Yes, I said. Write this down. I changed it because tonight I finally realized who my son actually is. When he left, the room fell silent again. I held the copy of the new will against my chest, careful of the broken ribs. For the first time in my life, the love I had for my son did not feel like a warm blanket. It felt like a chain I had just broken. I closed my eyes and let the morphine take the edge off the pain, finding a strange, cold peace in the knowledge that while I could not fix Mason's heart, I could absolutely fix his future with the law. I checked out of the hospital 2 days later. But I did not go back to the guest suite with the view of the lake. Instead, I took a cab to a budget hotel near downtown Dallas, the kind of place where the carpet smells of industrial cleaner and the ice machine is the loudest thing in the hallway. I checked in under my maiden name and sent a brief email to Mason. Taking a week at a wellness spa to recover, I wrote. Need absolute quiet. Phone will be off. It was a lie, but a necessary one. I needed him to think I was resting, licking my wounds, while I was actually sharpening my knife. Teresa met me in the hotel room the next morning. She brought a man with her, introduced as Salvatore Rossi. He was a forensic accountant, a small man with thick glasses and the demeanor of a bloodhound. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He set up his laptop on the scratched wooden desk and opened a spreadsheet that looked like a crime scene map. Mrs. Whitaker, Rossi said, turning the screen toward me. I have been crawling through the Silvertrail ledgers and your personal accounts for the last 48 hours. It is extensive. Show me, I said. He pointed to a column of recurring payments. See these every month for the last 2 years. Silvertrail has been paying a retainer fee of $4,500 to a vendor called North Lake Consulting. It is marked as logistical support. But North Lake Consulting has no website, no office, and no employees. It is a shell company registered to a P.O. box in Austin. And who owns the P.O. box, I asked, though I already felt the answer in my gut. Nora Whitaker, Rossi said flatly. The money goes into the North Lake account, sits there for 24 hours, and then is transferred to a private account solely in her name. From there, it goes to a mortgage servicer for a luxury condo on Elm Street. She is not just stealing from you, she is building a nest egg completely separate from your son. I stared at the screen. Nora was siphoning my company's profits to buy herself a backup plan. But Rossi was not finished. He clicked on another tab. Now, let's look at Mason's credit cards. The ones you pay off every month because you think they are for household expenses and business networking. He highlighted a series of charges. The country club membership is standard. But these travel expenses, business trips to Cabo and Aspen Silvertrail, has no clients in Mexico or Colorado. And looking at the flight manifests attached to the booking receipts, he is not traveling alone. He is traveling with a Ms. Kelsey Miller. Kelsey? I asked, confused. Is she a client? Teresa shook her head, her face grim. We looked her up. She is a 24-year-old fitness instructor. Mason isn't just bad at business. Lorraine. He is funding an affair with your money while his wife is busy embezzling funds to buy a secret condo. It is a house of cards built on your back. I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, bitter and dry. My son had broken my ribs to defend the honor of a wife who was stealing from him, while he was cheating on her with a girl young enough to be his daughter. There is one more thing, Teresa said, her voice dropping an octave. And this is the part that is going to hurt the most. You need to brace yourself. She slid a printed stack of emails across the table. They were conversations between Nora and a man named Dean, who used an email address from Maple Horizon Care. Dean is Nora's cousin, Teresa explained. He is an administrator at a private long-term care facility. Read the subject line. I looked down. The subject line read, Accelerated Placement Plan. I read the emails. My hands went cold. Nora was discussing a timeline. She asked about the legal requirements for involuntary commitment due to cognitive decline. Dean had replied with a draft contract, outlining how a power of attorney, the one I had almost signed in the kitchen, could be used to admit me to a secure memory unit if a cooperating psychologist signed off on my incompetence. They were not just waiting for me to die, I whispered, the horror of it settling into my bones like ice water. They were planning to lock me away. They wanted you out of the house and out of control. Rossi added gently, If you are declared incompetent, Mason gets full control of the trust. He could liquidate Silvertrail within a month. I looked at the total sum at the bottom of Rossi's report. The dinners, the trips, the condo, the shell company transfers. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a fortune stolen not by strangers, but by the people who sat at my Thanksgiving table. I did not cry. The tears I had shed in the hospital were the last ones Mason would ever get from me. I looked at the numbers, and I felt something inside me turn to stone. The mother in me died in that hotel room. "Teresa," I said, looking up, "I do not want just a lawsuit. I want a scorching of the earth." "I was hoping you would say that," Teresa replied, a shark-like smile touching her lips. "File the protection order," I commanded. "File the fraud charges, and get me the police. I want every single one of these numbers to be a bar in the cell they are going to live in." The war room was a small conference table in my hotel suite, covered in files, coffee cups, and the cold, hard evidence of betrayal. Teresa Klein did not mince words. She laid out the legal strategy with the precision of a surgeon preparing to cut out a tumor. "We are not just defending you, Lorraine," Teresa said, tapping a pen against a legal pad. "We are going on the offensive. We are filing for an emergency elder protection order. At the same time, we are filing a civil suit for financial abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit unlawful confinement. We are going to allege that they planned to strip you of your rights to access your own fortune." I looked at the photos of my grandchildren, Ellie and Jonah, which I had set up on the nightstand. A heavy rock settled in my stomach. If we go after Nora for fraud, if she goes to prison, what happens to the kids? I asked, my voice wavering. "I do not want to destroy their mother." Teresa sighed and pulled a sheet of paper from the bottom of the stack. "I debated showing you this, but you need to see it. This is an email Nora sent to her cousin last month." I read the highlighted paragraph. Nora had written, "Once the old hag is in the home, we can finally breathe. I am so tired of walking on eggshells in my own house. We just need to tolerate her for another few weeks until the paperwork is ready, and then she won't be around to bother us anymore." The rock in my stomach dissolved, replaced by a burning coal. She did not just want my money, she viewed my existence as a nuisance. "File the charges," I said, my voice flat, for the next 3 hours. I worked with Teresa to draft a detailed affidavit. It was agonizing. I had to catalogue every humiliation, every microaggression. I wrote about the ban on cooking in my own kitchen. I wrote about being told when I could sit in the living room. I wrote about the night Mason shoved me, describing in vivid detail how they concocted the lie about me tripping while I lay on the floor, unable to breathe. By the time I finished, I saw the pattern clearly. It was not a series of accidents. It was a slow, methodical erasure of my dignity. The next morning, we dropped the hammer. We filed the motions and formally requested the bank to freeze all auxiliary cards and accounts connected to the trust. The reaction was immediate. At 7 in the evening, my phone rang. It was Mason. I let it ring twice before answering, putting it on speaker so Teresa could hear. "Mom." Mason's voice was dripping with synthetic sweetness, though I could hear the tension underneath. "Hey, I am just calling to check on you. Are you still at the spa? Listen, something weird is happening. I am at dinner with some clients, and the corporate card just declined. Is there a glitch with the bank?" I looked at Teresa. She nodded. "There is no glitch. Mason," I said, keeping my tone icy. "What? Then why is it declined? I look like an idiot here." "Mum, you need to call the bank right now and fix this. I am not calling anyone." "Mason," I replied. "The accounts are frozen pending a forensic audit. If you have questions, You can direct them to the Board of Trustees. Do not call me again." I hung up before he could scream. His silence on the other end before the click was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years, to ensure they could never play the dementia card. Teresa arranged for me to see Dr. Aris, a forensic psychiatrist. He spent 4 hours interviewing me, testing my memory, my logic, and my emotional state. By the end, he signed an affidavit stating I was fully competent and operating with high cognitive function. That piece of paper was my shield against their nursing home plot. That night, my resolve was tested. My phone buzzed with a FaceTime request. It was Nora's phone, but when I answered, the screen was filled with the teary face of 7-year-old Ellie. "Grandma," she whispered. She was hiding in her closet. I could see the coats behind her. "When are you coming home? Mommy and Daddy are yelling a lot. Daddy threw a vase. They are fighting about your money." My heart broke. I wanted to rush over there, to scoop them up. But I knew if I went back now, I would lose everything, including the ability to help them later. "I am okay, sweetie," I cooed, pressing my hand to the screen. "Grandma is just fixing some things. I need you to be brave." "Okay, I promise. I promise I am going to make sure you are safe. Just stay in your room and play with your dolls." When the call ended, I was shaking. Teresa poured me a glass of water. "You cannot save them by going back. Lorraine, you save them by winning." She then laid out the final, brutal piece of our strategy. "It is time to divide and conquer," Teresa said. "Mason and Nora are united by greed. If we take that away, they turn on each other. But we can speed that up." She tapped the file containing the proof of Mason's affair with the fitness instructor and his gambling debts. "We send this package to Nora," Teresa suggested, her eyes narrowing. "We offer her a deal. If she testifies that Mason was the mastermind behind the nursing home scheme and the financial fraud, we argue for leniency on her behalf. We give her a way out." I thought of Nora's cruel email. I thought of Mason's hands on my chest. "Do it," I said. "If he wants to play games with my life, let's see how he handles his wife finding out he spent her stolen money on another woman." The first hearing for the protective order took place in a small, windowless courtroom that smelled faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. When I walked in, flanked by Teresa and a court-martial, I saw Mason. He looked awful. His suit, usually pressed to military precision, was wrinkled at the elbows, and he had dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Nora sat next to him, but there was a palpable distance between them, like a chasm had opened up in the defense table. She refused to look at me, keeping her eyes fixed on her clasped hands. Mason's lawyer, a slick man with a shiny tie, tried to paint a picture of a loving, if slightly chaotic, family dynamic. "Your Honor," he began, gesturing vaguely at the air. "The petitioner is a generous woman who has historically supported her son and daughter-in-law with significant financial gifts. These transfers were family agreements, not theft. And regarding the injuries, well, Mrs. Whitaker is getting older. She has had balance issues. This was a tragic accident where she misstepped and fell. My client was merely trying to help her up." I felt my blood pressure rise, but Teresa placed a calming hand on my arm. She stood up and connected her laptop to the courtroom projector. "A misstep," Teresa repeated dryly. "Let us look at the physics of this misstep." She flashed a photo onto the screen. It was a close-up of my back and side taken immediately after the incident. A massive purple bruise stretched across my ribs, perfectly straight, matching the sharp edge of my kitchen island. This impact pattern is not consistent with a slump or a trip, Teresa argued, her voice echoing off the wood panelling. It is consistent with being forcefully propelled backward, and we have the sworn affidavit of the attending nurse, stating that Mrs. Whittaker was visibly terrified of her son and daughter-in-law in the emergency room, changing her story only when Mr. Whittaker squeezed her hand. The judge, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, frowned deeply at the photos. Then came the turn. Nora stood up. She did not look at Mason. She looked straight at the judge. "Your Honor," Nora said, her voice trembling slightly. I would like to speak, not as a defendant, but I have information relevant to the court." Mason's head snapped toward her so fast I thought his neck might crack. "Nora, what are you doing? Quiet?" The judge snapped. "Go on." "Mrs. Whittaker." Nora took a breath, and then she let the dam break. "It is true. The transfers to Northlake Consulting, the emails about the nursing home, it is all true. But it was Mason's idea. He was the one who said we needed to secure our future because his mother was becoming erratic with money. I just went along with it because I was afraid. I was afraid he would leave me if I did not support him. I have 2 children to think of." Mason looked like he had been slapped. His mouth hung open, soundless. He had expected loyalty, unaware that loyalty in a transaction-based relationship ends the moment the check bounces. Teresa, however, was not about to let Nora rewrite history so easily. "We appreciate Mrs. Whittaker's sudden candor," Teresa said, pulling up another document. "But let the record show that this fear she speaks of did not stop her from sending the following text message to her cousin on the 14th of last month." Teresa read the text aloud, her voice devoid of emotion. "The old hag is living too long. If she does not kick the bucket soon, we are going to be stuck changing her diapers. I am counting the months until the inheritance hits." Nora's face went crimson. She sank back into her chair, unable to refute her own digital venom. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Whittaker, do you have anything to add regarding the events of that night?" I stood up. My ribs ached, a dull reminder of why I was here. I looked directly at Mason. I wanted him to see me, really see me, one last time. He did not try to catch me, I said, my voice clear and steady. I was holding proof of their theft. I refused to sign his papers. He looked me in the eye. He shouted, "Don't touch my wife," and he shoved me. When I hit the counter, when I heard my own bones snap, he did not call for help. He looked at me and said, "I was just defending my wife." That was the moment my son died. Your Honor, the man sitting there is just a stranger who shares my DNA. The courtroom was silent. The judge looked from me to Mason, her expression hardening into steel. "I have heard enough," the judge ruled, bringing her gavel down with a sharp crack. "I am granting the temporary protective order. Mr. and Mrs. Whittaker are barred from coming within 500 feet of the plaintiff. All assets related to the trust and the company are to remain frozen pending the outcome of the civil and criminal investigations." Clark. Next case. We walked out into the hallway. Mason was waiting for us near the elevators. He was shaking, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He stepped forward, ignoring his lawyer's attempt to hold him back. "You are destroying this family." Mason screamed, his voice cracking. Are you happy now? You are ruining everything because of your pride. You just could not let it go. Could you? I stopped. I looked at him, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, empty quiet. No. Mason, I said softly, I am not doing this for pride. I am just refusing to be your bottomless wallet anymore. I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit, listening to his incoherent shouting fade behind me, knowing I would never look back. The final hearing regarding the financial abuse and conspiracy to commit unlawful confinement began 6 months after the incident in my kitchen. By then, Mr. Rossi had mapped out the theft with terrifying precision. He projected a diagram onto the courtroom wall that looked less like a financial report and more like a maze. He traced every dollar Mason and Nora had siphoned from my accounts, linking them to luxury car leases, unauthorized vacations, and the down payment on Nora's secret condo. It was a visual autopsy of their greed. Mason's lawyer tried one last, desperate pivot. He argued that this was not a crime, but a family dispute fueled by my jealousy. He read aloud text messages I had sent to my best friend years ago, complaining that Nora was cold or that Mason spent too much time with her family. Mrs. Whitaker is not a victim of fraud, the lawyer declared, sweating under the fluorescent lights. She is a mother engaging in emotional retaliation because she feels replaced. She is trying to punish her son for loving his wife. Teresa stood up slowly. She did not raise her voice. She simply held up the stack of emails between Nora and the nursing home administrator. The law does not punish people for their feelings. Counselor, Teresa said, her voice cutting through the room like a razor. The law punishes actions. And the action here was a conspiracy to imprison a mentally competent woman against her will to gain access to her trust fund. We are not here because Mrs. Whitaker is sad. We are here because your clients forged signatures and planned a kidnapping. Then came the moment that silenced the room. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly seen enough, leaned over her bench and looked directly at Mason. Mr. Whitaker, she asked, do you have any remorse for the physical altercation that resulted in your mother's hospitalization? Mason hesitated. He looked at me, then at Nora, then at the floor. I just wanted things to be less stressful, Mason mumbled, his voice cracking. Mom always makes everything into a war. I was just trying to stop the fighting. He did not apologize. He blamed me for his violence. He blamed me for his theft. The judge's face hardened. She delivered her verdict immediately. Mason and Nora were ordered to repay every cent they had taken, plus interest and punitive damages. Because Nora agreed to testify against the nursing home network, a massive scheme that preyed on vulnerable seniors, she received a reduced sentence of probation. Mason was stripped of all access to the family trust. My new will was validated in full. We walked out into the late afternoon sun. Mason was standing near the steps, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He walked over to me, his hands in his pockets. He did not yell this time. Do you really want me to be left with nothing? He asked quietly. I am your son. Do you want me to be destitute? I looked at him, and for the first time, I did not see a boy who needed saving. I saw a man who needed to fall. No, I replied. I just want you to stand on your own 2 feet, for the first time in your life. From across the plaza, I saw Ellie and Jonah walking with the court-appointed social worker. They spotted me and ran over, their little faces lighting up. Grandma Ellie cried, burying her face in my coat. Can we get ice cream, like we used to? Soon, baby, I promised, stroking her hair. We will get the biggest sundaes in Texas. I watched them walk away, knowing that the trust fund I set up for them was the only tether I would keep to my bloodline. It was a safety net for them, not a hammock for their parents. That night, back in my quiet, simple apartment, I opened my laptop. I pulled up the digital scan of my will and scrolled to the bottom. There, in the footnotes, was the line I had asked the notary to include. I changed this will on the night my son broke my ribs to defend his wife. I closed the laptop. I sat in the silence, feeling the ache in my side, a permanent reminder of the price I paid. But as I looked out at the city lights, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had lost a son. Yes, but I had saved my dignity. To anyone reading this, I want you to know that cutting off a toxic family member feels like amputating a limb. It hurts. It leaves a scar. But sometimes, it is the only way to save the rest of the body. If I had to go back to that kitchen, if I had to feel my ribs crack all over again to learn this lesson, I would do it. Because sometimes, the only way to be free is to let the people you love suffer the consequences of who they really are. Thank you so much for listening to my story and walking this difficult road with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on my decision. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this message with more people who might need to hear it.